It's time to welcome back the teacher. So what we did was we've obviously talked about why do it. Now the question is, how do you do it? How do you put this incredibly complex team together that has not necessarily conflicting objectives, but sometimes don't align as well as maybe they should? And that is about building a compelling business case that makes you stand head and shoulders above the competition. So please welcome Tim back to the stage.
I think we can agree Arif has a beautiful smile, right? Thank you very much. Let's go to the Slido results. We spoke about collaboration earlier, if you don't mind. My sense is, looking at those early results, there's more collaboration in the room than we expected, which is exactly what I think AviaDev is focused on, and the reason why more and more people keep coming back year by year to support their airports in doing route development. Just the results of the previous one, yeah. But Arif, I think, underlined a couple of points about another kind of collaboration, right? We're going to see the collaboration now around doing route development. But I touched on earlier the collaboration between us as destinations, how we present Africa to the world, right? One of the issues, and I think Zanzibar's at the front line, feel free to bring it up whenever you find those results. Zanzibar's at the front line of a lot of issues that we face across Africa, right? How to preserve the product, which is based on a natural heritage and natural environment. There we go. So collaboration, a clear winner already in terms of these models. And I think you'll see more and more of this. If we run this year by year, you'll see these collaborative models start to emerge as the leader. And we'll come to the second Slido in a sec. But just to make this point about Zanzibar kind of leading the rest of us in terms of the issues around growth for tourism, right? Firstly, this idea of flight shaming, of long-haul travel, particularly from Europe, the USA, and Asia into Africa, I think is an argument that we need to win together as Africa, right? We're sitting not only in a continent with 20% of the world's forests, with 30% of the world's woodlands, but also this enormous rising population of young Africans who are under or unemployed. And there's no way to secure a future for the environment or a future for young Africans without long-haul travel. You'll hear a lot at the conference around what carriers are doing to drive sustainability, but ultimately we need to win the argument that everybody traveling to Africa as a tourist has a net benefit on not just social and economic livelihoods, but also actually a net benefit in terms of the environmental impact. There's no way to preserve what we have on this continent without long-haul travel. That's an argument that we have to win together. The second one, Arif made the point about collaborating more as destinations across the regions. Our experience, certainly in Southern Africa, is that more and more of our high-spending travelers are looking to do multi-country itineraries. They're looking to string together the best of what our countries have to offer in a single package. And the only way they can sustainably do that is with the regional connections and the airlines that we have here today, helping to make it possible to connect our destinations to each other in a single itinerary. And what that means, when you couple the idea that Arif spoke about of tourists wanting to travel point to point and increasingly able to do long-haul point to point because the technology supports it in our aircraft, you start to see this picture emerging of not a hub and spoke for Africa, but rather regional itineraries with strong regional connections between sometimes smaller airports that together create the package for tourism that Africa takes to the world. And I think that's one of the reasons why you've seen such extraordinary growth in AviaDev year on year, but also in the regional connections that make that offer a reality. Essentially, we don't compete anymore destination to destination. We collaborate to take a single package to the world of Africa as an easily connectable and connected to destination. But now, as an individual destination, what are you taking to the carriers? how are you building out this business case, ideally with your partners around the table, that shows the carriers how they can make money connecting to your destination. Let's start with a Slido to understand the kind of benchmarks in terms of, there we go, the business case. So these are some of the things that you might include in your information pack to a carrier. Let's see what the room thinks in terms of the most important. Traffic forecasts. This is interesting because most people have historical traffic. The extent to which you can forecast traffic perhaps becomes important, and that will come up in a second. Historical traffic data, tourism performance, economic landscape, infrastructure, evidence of that collaboration we spoke about, and then carrier supports and incentives. Please feel free to keep. Thanks. Just put this here. Right, so we can go to the slides. Thank you. Why do we do all of this? What's the impact of travel through a non-stop flight to a destination? We modeled what happens when you secure a new service on an A330, essentially moving through different scenarios in terms of traveler numbers. You're looking at anything from 15 to 50,000 passengers over the scenarios in a 3-year period. Now, we're speaking a lot about tourism as the base case for every business case. But remember, the front of the plane in these, let's say, 40 business class seats that you can configure on that A330 is going to create a high proportion of not just high spending travelers, but perhaps investors or travelers that might come back to invest once they've visited as a tourist. So you can see the impact of a flight like this, a single new service on a 3 times a week frequency, directly in the number of travelers to your destination. Then, what about how much those travelers spend? If you take out that modeling that we've done and extrapolate it in terms of a relatively conservative spend per traveler in your destination, you see a direct and indirect tourism spend impact of between 46 and 139 million US dollars between a 1 and a 3-year period. So this is how we win the argument with funders, with business, with decision makers in government to say why we are doing air service development, why we're going to Aviadev every year, why we're engaged in these conversations with carriers, because of the direct tourism number benefit and spend benefit that then can extrapolate into more investments, more exports, and stronger economic performance that gives our destinations the jobs that our leaders and politicians are working for as their primary objective. But to secure these services, the challenge for a destination is to tell a story of growth, right? Essentially, the carriers can all see the historical numbers. They can see who's been traveling back and forth and from where to your destinations. Your challenge as a destination is to tell them about what's going to happen in the future, right? And that's why the story is so important. We took 2 examples here. The one I spoke about earlier, Cape Town, which when we started the project in 2015 did not have non-stop service to the US. We were engaging with carriers talking about this performance in 2021. We were saying, we understand that traveler numbers are at that level, but we want to tell you a story about Cape Town as a growing destination for the US market. Equally, you look at a totally different model, Eswatini, where up until this point, that was their total passenger numbers for their international airport. And they were telling a story about a lack of connections that they solved through reestablishing their own state carrier. So this is not just about collaborative air service development on the left, but also the impact of securing a new carrier like Eswatini Air. Both involved telling a story about growth, and both involved an extraordinary growth story, right? So therefore, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you can tell a story to carriers around what can happen in the future, you can make that future a reality. In the Cape Town example, United Airlines came back with 2 flights, and then Delta Airlines followed shortly afterwards. Now Cape Town has 3 destinations serviced in the US across 2 carriers, which has driven this extraordinary growth story. Eswatini reintroduced their carrier and dramatically grew their numbers by connecting to destinations like Joburg, Harare, Cape Town, and Durban. In both examples, whether you choose to do collaborative air service development or not, your challenge is to tell a story about growth, right? And what are the building blocks of that story? We've spoken about the importance of tourism. We've spoken about how it underpins every business case as the majority factor. The majority of seats are always going to be sold to tourists. So we have to sell the best of what we have as a continent. Places like Victoria Falls, like Kilimanjaro, like the Delta. But airlines are always interested in the wider growth narrative, the wider development story. What are your companies doing? What are multinational companies doing in a destination? What sectors are growing? That's how you round out the story of tourism growth. It's about your development model, about your economic growth story, and your investment trends. Where's the momentum coming from? Remember, the challenge is to tell a story about the future. Investment is an excellent proxy for airlines believing that you're in a rising destination. Essentially, they need to say, not only can I sell more tourist tickets on this route, but I'm investing in a place that's going to drive growth in the future. By putting on this flight, I'm part of that investment story that's going to secure a long-term business case for my airline. You can see it is about much more than not only aviation data, but it's even about much more than just tourism data. So maybe at this point, let's bring up the results of the Slido, because these are the kinds of things that you were able to vote for on the Slido. There we go. So traffic forecasts, 70%. I think that's probably spot on in our experience. Historical traffic data, really important. You have to be able to access it at least, because the airline certainly will have it, and they'll be cross-checking your story as a destination, their network planners. Tourism, carrier supports and incentives, economic landscape, infrastructure and regulation, and then evidence of a collaboration. One thing I would argue here is that evidence of a collaboration would probably, for us, fall higher on this list. The airlines, as you'll see in a little while, they love the credibility of working with a destination that is joined up, where they understand if they're working with you, they're getting direct insights and support from the tourism board, from the investment board, from the ministries, and from the private sector. Thanks very much. So we can go back to the slides and unpack what each of these elements of a business case could look like. So coordinated air service development, that's what I'm talking about. Evidence that we're working together, that we're hunting as a pack. Number 2, the economic landscape. Namibia, for example, telling their story of becoming the largest energy economy in Africa. Trade, it's a story that's about growing trade in the face of a difficult international trade environment. And it's also signaling that the belly of the plane is something that will be part of the business case. We've all noticed since COVID, when the air cargo story became the reason many carriers survived, or their particular routes survived, it's now become a super important part of every business case. I've never been in a single conversation with a carrier around a new route without being able to explain the potential to import and export product in the belly of the plane. Obviously, while we get the slides back, direct carrier support and incentives are also important, because allowing an airline to enjoy discounts at the beginning of a service and have an easier pathway to launching is a way of de-risking the new route for the carrier. Every single carrier will ask for incentives and perhaps additional route support. And the challenge for the destination, particularly African destinations, where perhaps we're not as well funded as some of the places we're competing with around the world, is to develop a broader package to de-risk the new service for the airline and make sure that they can get to a sustainable service, usually over a 1 to 3 year period. Helping them to understand the regulatory environment and the quality of infrastructure is also important. Because, as I said before, the airport experience is the first interaction that any destination has with a carrier, and we have seen examples where carriers don't enjoy world-class service from the airport, and then reconsider the entire route, where the destination carries the cost of perhaps a relatively simple service issue at airport level. I'm now doing this without slides. Okay, doing this without slides. Let me get some notes then. One sec. We're back. Great, thanks. There we go. Okay, so I think we covered all of these, maybe with the exception of ad hoc industries. So many of you will have niche industries. You'll have sectors like, in this case, the film sector. I think this is a quote from perhaps the Namibians, where an airline can understand that a film sector might be an important part of their future ticket sales. And you might have a MICE industry, you might have energy sector, where it's important that you can emphasize the growth story in those particular sectors as they're going to influence ticket sales. But essentially, if you can put together as many of these elements as possible into a business case, you start seeing the comprehensive story that you can tell around growth to the carrier. Thanks very much. So the question is now the role of your private sector, right? I spoke about some of those companies that came together to support Cape Town Air Access. We know Business Botswana and the tourism industry bodies support Botswana Air Access very closely. Why does that matter? What can the private sector do to support the airport and to support the government partners in making these compelling business cases? Well, the one way is just funding support, right? It could be funding for the project, or it also could be saying, we're going to put together a package to support your new route that's going to include marketing contributions from the private sector. Market intelligence as well. You'll be surprised how credible the numbers that the corporates give you are in the eyes of carriers. If they see that business is supporting your data with their own insights, with their own data, that's a very clear way of saying we're a destination that you should take seriously. Also, your private sector companies, particularly your biggest tourism companies and your multinationals, have enormous marketing heft. So if you say we're going to launch a new flight from a destination on the back of your service, but not only that, we're going to leverage our private sector players and their marketing heft to make sure that flight is sustainable, it becomes a very compelling addition to a business case. Second to last, policy advocacy. We know businesses have a loud voice in terms of advocating for reforms and advocating for things that carriers are looking for. And then lastly, route sustainability. Simply the tickets that are bought by the carriers, or rather by the businesses on each of these routes. And there's some fascinating examples around our region where business ticket sales have actually propped up individual flights, making that flight available for wider tourist users and other passengers. So clearly, particularly in Africa, having this joined up approach that includes the private sector is not just a good idea in general, it also helps you build much more powerful business cases. And the end result is this. This is what all of us should be working towards. We can sit here and have these route development conversations, but unless the carriers are responding, unless the carriers are saying, I'm getting what I need from this destination, you're not going to get those new services. And when you present comprehensive, holistic business cases that show the carriers where they can make money, you get this positive response. And here's a couple of examples from some of our regional carriers and the airports company South Africa. So you come to AviaDev, you have these conversations, you're doing it ideally in a collaborative way, you're telling a story about the future. What do you do next? Well, we would argue that you don't stop. It's a long-term relationship management process. In the 12 months between now and next year's AviaDev, you need to manage the relationship with the carriers by going to perhaps other conferences, by leveraging the tourism conferences. You go to Indaba, you make sure that there's someone there who can speak to whichever airline representative is in the room. You perhaps go to the carrier's head office. You travel to their head office and say, we spoke about connecting to my African destination last year. Now, to show you how serious we are, we're here in your head office, in the boardroom, to carry on that conversation. You're building a long-term approach to relationship management that shows the carrier that you are serious about winning them for your destination. And if you do that through a single point of contact, then you're giving the carrier all of the elements of the business case that they need from all of the parties across government and the private sector, but you're giving it to them on a plate through a single point of contact. And that's why the projects that you see, Botswana Air Access, for example, creates the single point of contact between everything Botswana offers and the airline's understanding of the business case. That's the power of the collaborative model, is not just all of the partners that are involved, but the fact that you're managing the relationship through a single point of contact. The other implication of this is that you can rope in your partners across the collaboration to fly the flag on your project whenever they might engage with the airline. So what that means is, if your investment board is going on a mission to some destination that happens to be host to a carrier that you want to attract to your destination, you can give them a business case that not only gives the updated information they were asking for last time you met, but you can ensure a kind of seamless flow of data and insights as you hold that relationship, no matter who is speaking to the carrier from your country or your private sector. This is important as well, is the sequencing of what you focus on. We spend a lot of time at AviaDev thinking about what new services we can attract, which carriers and which markets are not connected to our destination. But actually, your number one priority should be retaining the carriers you have. I'm sure those of you that are from carriers in the room will endorse this point. If you've committed to a market, you need to be that market's number one priority, right? A big mistake would be chasing new services without looking after the services you have. Secondly, in terms of expansion, the carriers that you have are more likely and easier able to add additional seats and additional routes than a carrier who's testing your market for the first time. So we always talk about retention, expansion, then introduction. It's very important that you follow that order. Look after the carriers that you have, help them to expand, and then lastly, when they're feeling the love, chase down additional carriers to round out your route network. If you do that, you can be part, we would suggest, of this extraordinary success in new routes that have happened across Africa in the last 10 years. These happen to be examples of new routes that have launched off the back of collaborations. But as we've shown in this presentation, there's other models to get there. We just happen to believe collaborative air service development is best suited for us in the region. But whatever happens, this story, making sure that we grow connections regionally and we solve that underrepresentation of Africa in global aviation, is the single best way to achieve all of our growth potential, to achieve the African growth story. There's no way, I believe, that we can achieve our aspirations, that we can achieve our potential without solving connectivity. And that means not just collaborating more internally through air service development initiatives, but collaborating between regions, countries, and airports to take the message of Africa's extraordinary potential to the world and make sure that that potential is unlocked through new connectivity. Thank you very much.